hear us? I saw sort of, there was an audio going on. Hello, Christy. Christina, can you hear us? Can we hear you?
I'm here, thanks.
Great. And Vernon and Cherie?
I'm here.
Very good.
I'm here.
And who is on 240? Who's calling in by telephone?
That's me. Zoom link. It's the Zoom link on my phone didn't work for some reason. It keeps crashing.
And who is speaking?
It's Captain Satinsky.
Jordan.
Captain Jordan Satinsky, thank you very much. And we see Captain Hokinkas with us, Lieutenant Miller, Sergeant Brewer. Thank you. So I'm calling our meeting to order. And we have, I think, some minutes to adopt. The minutes would be of, did we get minutes of a September of a meeting a year ago?
Yes, they should have been distributed by Logan. Unfortunately, Logan's not here. He's on leave today.
Okay. Let's,
I move approval of those minutes subject to any corrections.
Vernon moves to
I
adopt
second,
minutes of the September meeting, and that was seconded by
Christy.
Christy. Very good. All those in favor say aye or raise your hand. Aye. Okay. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Minutes are adopted. Were there also other minutes, Susan, of another meeting?
There were the July minutes from last meeting, as well as the September ones from last year.
Is there a motion regarding the July minutes?
Move acceptance subject to any corrections.
Vernon moves to accept. Is there a second?
I second.
And then Christie seconds. All those in favor, please raise your hand. I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Christina, if you would indicate at least you raised your hand. Excellent. Any, I see, therefore, and Cherie, did I see? Very good. I see no abstentions, no opposition. The motion carries. One of the questions that had sort of been hanging had been the virtual reality training. And Ty, if I am correct, you'd ask that we have some time for someone from the MCPD to bring us up to date on that and to add that to the minutes. Is that correct?
That is correct. However, I'm not sure right now if we have that person online. I contacted Susan earlier to discuss that. If they're here and available, absolutely.
I
Susan,
believe Captain Satinsky is going to speak to that.
Yeah.
perfect. Perfect.
Yeah, if you guys don't mind. Sorry, and I apologize for not being on camera. I apologize.
Okay.
So the current virtual reality system that we are looking.
Wait, just
to
a moment,
purchase-
Captain. Captain?
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not calling on you yet. Wanted to make
Oh, sorry.
first that that we're going to be first just sort of monitoring the we're going to add this after our overview of the pilot drone first responder, which is item 4 on the agenda. Well, before I do that, I wanted to discuss the annual report for a few minutes, and then we'll get to the MCPD reports. Is that all right, folks?
That's fine.
So I've been working on the annual report. I've shared some versions. I have not yet gone through our minutes of May, June, July for capturing sort of the updates. So the latest draft that I have is about 10 pages with a couple of appendices. And then there would be, Cherie had asked for some data regarding traffic fines and procurement back when we were discussing the STEP Act, and I don't know if we got that. I thought that might be appropriate for us to include as well. So I don't think I don't feel ready to adopt an annual report yet. But I'm willing to sort of, have any sort of discussion that would be appropriate for a few minutes. If there are people who have comments or suggestions they want to make, or things that they want to emphasize, and then we'll move on with the rest of the items that are on our agenda. So first, we'll take up the question of any comments or suggestions regarding the latest draft of the annual report. Does anybody want to be recognized?
I would like to be recognized.
Lori,
Lori. It's near and dear to my heart, all this stuff about review of body camera footage. And I noticed that there's supposed to be an Appendix 3 that's supposed to be the data collection instrument for this review. And I'm not seeing it attached to the current draft. So I wonder if you can send it to me. I'd like to see what it looks like. We had provided a series of questions to the police about how they were going to do their body camera footage. And we got some general answers about it, but I don't think we specifically got our questions answered. I mean, that's something to pursue outside of the annual report. But I think that we might want to, I think that reviewing the data collection instrument would be a good idea to see if that was responsive to some of the questions we'd asked.
So Lori, thank you. I mean, that's a part that I think we want to continue to sort of flesh out. I don't know if you had a chance to look at what I had shared probably just before 6 o'clock. Probably folks were in the middle of getting something to eat in advance of the meeting. But I sort of made some more reference to the policy that Sergeant Brewer had alerted us to a few meetings ago. So I do want that that is an important part of what we've been talking about. I wanted to make sure that was more complete than it is in the current version. Vice Chair McKinney.
Oh, yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. The issue that I had regarding what was going into the annual report was the view that I had, and I think you made note of that earlier, whether or not you had captured in some of the other correspondence, the view that I was putting forth. And what we were speaking about, I was speaking specifically about consent searches. When we had Councilman Jawando present and we discussed the issue of consent searches, he talked about being willing to modify the language to an extent. My position was that I didn't fully support complete removal of a police officer being able to request a consent search, because I found that to be a very useful tool in my own work that speaks to just an officer who has spent an extended amount of time being a police officer, and their intuition sometimes aids them in being able to prevent crime. So I wasn't sure that I wanted to completely suggest that be removed as a useful tool. However, Councilman Jawando did say that he was amenable.
Would that be more appropriate for our discussion of the STEP Act letter where we specifically go into this in the draft of a.
Yeah, so we can discuss it there as well, but I thought a part of that was going to be added to the annual report, since we were addressing the STEP Act as well, but I can do it then. That's fine.
Why don't we have this discussion in the context of our STEP Act letter?
I'll do that.
Okay, because I think that the annual report then will reflect what we decide
Okay,
on that letter.
that's right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Vernon,
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I was just wondering, you said it's 10 pages long. How much longer will it be? Because my thing has been that most politicians don't read it. Don't read all of it. A summary or what have you is what they read, and that's it. However, I am in touch with that we want to stuff this one up some council people's nose if it's even 50 pages, because they said we hadn't done anything. And,
so I think that a summary is appropriate, and I would prepare a summary at the beginning, but I wanted the report itself at least to be mostly finished before I wrote the summary of the report.
Yeah.
But I agree with you, Vernon, that a report should have a summary at the beginning. And I did want our report, since due to the leadership transitions in the summer and fall of 2022, we did not submit an annual report. I wanted to demonstrate that we took seriously the responsibility of preparing an annual report for the public and for the council, and that it adequately represented what we've been attempting to do. So Vernon, thank you. I do intend to have a summary. If there aren't further comments then on the draft, I'm sorry, Cherie, please.
Yeah, I do. This is my only recommendation on the report, and because I do agree with Vernon to some extent about what people actually read. I think it would be really helpful to have a list of these are all the times we met. I mean, you know, we met on all these days, and you know, and it doesn't have to be more than a listing. You know, the PAC met, you know, this time, because our meetings far exceeded what's necessary under the legislation that established us. So I think that should be pointed out. The other list is that I think we did either send letters or respond to request on a few things from the council. I think there should just be a list of those things. I'm pretty sure we had at least one public forum. And so there should be a listing of that. And so, you know, those, you know, in addition to the narrative, I think that kind of listing is helpful for some people to understand that this commission has been very busy.
Thank you, Cherie. I intended to do that in the course of the summary to have that, but it was very helpful for me for you to restate that so succinctly right now. Lori, did I see your hand?
Yeah, I would just say that if we have lists of things like the times we met or our various products or correspondence, that, you know, they can all be an appendix. And in your summary, it can just say, we met 14 times, we provided information or comments on X number of occasions, or et cetera, so that, you know, we can keep it short and sweet in the front, but, you know, the referring them to the parts of the report where they can see more information. But you're going to do that. I mean, it sounds like that's your plan already.
Thanks, Lori. I
Yeah.
think that Sherry's point is about sort of identifying early up. Here are the things that we did to exceed the minimum, such as the number
Yeah.
of meetings. So we complied with the requirement that there be a public, that be, you know, clear enough at the beginning in addition to everything else. But thank you, Lori, for that. So that and we'll figure out sort of
Mhm.
what should belong in an appendix that describes that.
Yeah.
If there aren't other comments then on the annual report, we do have our guests. We did want to get briefed on the drone program, and then on Christy, I beg your pardon. Go ahead, please.
Sorry, I was just looking for my unmute button. I think the other thing that we should make sure that we note is the times during which the county was not really having meetings in person, just to note that, like, while we've sort of been a year out of COVID here, like, honestly, there was a lot of time period where things were not operating as normal. You know, this past year, people were really just getting back to normal course of business. I don't know how many like other committees and such have met in person even frequently over the last year. Just something to note.
Thank you. And of course, one opportunity is that by not meeting in person, we have at least maximized the opportunity for members of the public to participate. They don't have to leave the comfort of their home to come to Rockville, however far that might be, that anybody in any part of the county who has access to the internet can access our meetings. Vernon?
Very quickly, in some place in there that we thank the staff for the support that they have given us, and that you know, they went above and beyond the duty, right along with the committee on numbers of meetings and what have you. So, and the other organizations like the police department and all.
Thank you, Vernon. That I appreciate being reminded of the service that our staff and that our ex officio members have played, because we could not have done our work without their assistance. And they have been generous with their time and very, very helpful. Thank you, Vernon. I appreciate your reminding me of that at this time. Let's with that, let's move ahead, as we had on the agenda, to a discussion of the drone program for first responders. Who is going to take the lead on that?
Good evening, Captain Jason Kokinos.
Captain, good to see you again. We appreciate the time that you have taken in prior meetings, back in meeting with the hiring and discipline subcommittee in prior years.
Yeah, it's good to see some of you again. Some of you are new to since I've last spoke with you all. So I appreciate Mr. Chair adding me to the agenda and members of the PAC for taking the time to hear this brief presentation. So I appreciate your willingness to engage and be a part of the discussion. So whenever is appropriate, is it okay for me to share my screen?
That would be perfect. And I'm going to go off camera for a moment.
Okay.
You're recognized, Captain.
Great. Okay, thank you. All right, thank you. So I'm going to, so for those that don't know me, my name is Jason Kokinos. I'm the director of our Special Operations Division here at Montgomery County Police. And part of Special Operations is our UAS drone program. So I want to briefly go through this presentation as quick as I can to allow time for discussion and questions. Basically, I'd like to introduce to you a concept called drone as first responder. This particular cutting edge technology is relatively new. There's about 15 agencies in the United States that are actively pursuing this concept, with really about 4 or 5 that are really advanced, if you will. 3 of those agencies are in the state of California, Beverly Hills, California, Santa Monica, California, and Chula Vista, California. Chula Vista is the where this all started. They're the most experienced. They have a very robust website. If you Google Chula Vista Police Drone Program, there's a lot of really good information on there. And we were fortunate to be able to go out to California and research this technology at that agency and bring back some really good stuff that we've incorporated in some of our planning and discussions here in Montgomery County. So as we get into this, I first want to start with what is MCPD's proposed definition of this program and what it means to Montgomery County. So the Drone as First Responder Program, it utilizes a unmanned aerial system, a drone system, to fly to a call for service and arrive prior to or in conjunction with first responders on the ground. This DFR program assists in helping evaluate the scene and circumstances before officers arrive, and then while an event is ongoing. This will provide necessary information, situational awareness. It'll help our officers safely respond to incidents with better information, their ability to de-escalate, and increase efficiency, which I'll briefly talk about those different points as we move on. So a little bit about the program. It's a focused program. It's related to police calls for service. This is not a program with drones that are going to be up in the sky, flying around the county, just patrolling in the air, following people. That's not what this is at all. It is directly a 911 call or a police officer generated call for emergency service that this program will be focused on providing assistance to. As the PAC is aware, MCPD has some significant staffing issues, and those staffing issues are growing. We are looking to leverage technology to be able to maintain our service to the community or enhance that service. So this Drone as First Responder Program, as I'll explain, it helps with response times. It helps with that police officer decision-making, information to aid in proper decisions and de-escalation, and then the goal of enhancing public safety for everybody. A lot of large police agencies like Montgomery County have an air support section, have a helicopter. Many of our neighboring jurisdictions, state police, Prince George's County, Washington, D.C., all have human staffed helicopters. The drone program, and this program in particular, is very similar to a helicopter, except for doesn't burn fuel. It's clean for the environment. It runs on battery power, and it's a lot safer because we're not putting people in the air in a machine. And one thing which I'll explain too is that there is the potential with this program to reduce unnecessary law enforcement contacts in certain circumstances. I'll elaborate a little bit more into that as I get into an example, but essentially by getting on scene or overhead an event before officers get on scene, the drone may be able to dispel a particular call or resolve a particular call through visual observation that would cancel the police officers from having to actually show. The drone will be dispatched as will human police officers, so there'll still be a police response, but the drone will get there a lot faster and may be able to resolve a situation without the need of contact. Just a couple of things. This is some proposed language that we're putting in a policy that's under review. Essentially, just a couple of things that the drone program, in particular DFR, and our existing drone program are not. So they're only going to be deployed and used in official law enforcement and public safety activities. Now, our existing drone program is used in outreach and community engagement. The Drone as a First Responder will be official law enforcement and public safety calls and generated calls. The drone system is operated. We are governed by the Federal Aviation Administration. Our pilots are all licensed by the FAA. We have special waivers to operate in the airspace around Washington, D.C.
Captain,
Yes,
May I interrupt you? Can you just give us a sense of the size of what you're talking about?
the drone itself.
Yes, that's right.
I
It's-
have a, in a coming slide, I have a
Perfect.
picture for you with those specifications.
Go
That's a
ahead.
good question.
Apologize for interrupting you.
No, you're absolutely fine. No problem. So we have to obtain, because we are outside Washington DC, we're in a special airspace. So we have to obtain a number of waivers and authorizations to operate in the airspace of Silver Spring and Wheaton and Rockville. So we're under some pretty heavy approvals and review and oversight by the FAA. So this is a very serious program. I don't want anyone to think that we're just making it up. We have some very strict rules we follow. The collection, the use of the drones, the UAS, will not be based solely on individual characteristics, race, ethnic background, national origin, sexual orientation, anything like that. It is not used in that manner. It also is not used to identify people participating in lawful First Amendment protected activities. We're not going to be flying this program to surveil people that are lawfully expressing their beliefs. That's not part of this program. This program is not to be used in conjunction with any facial recognition software or programs that exist, this program will not be collecting any audio or voice recordings. That will not be done with this program. So just a couple of early points of what it's not going to be doing. One thing I will say is I've gotten questions as I've engaged our community. They're great questions. The video that we obtain in using these drones are going to be treated the same as evidentiary video from body camera and in-car mobile video systems in our police cars. So all of the video uploads into evidence.com, which is our repository for evidentiary video. And it is going to be stored in the same manner as police body camera and police in-car video footage. So very heavily restricted, official use only, and it will be treated the same way as our existing policies on retention periods, access, and things of that nature. So we're not reinventing the wheel with this particular video. It's going to be treated the same as other video. Before the picture that's coming up about what the drone looks like, real briefly, how does this work? There'll be a building, the purple building in this picture. There'll be a drone that is stationed on top of a building. We're proposing downtown Silver Spring and downtown Wheaton in the central business districts. There'll be a drone stationed on top of the building. On top of the building will be a person that is it's regulated at this time by the FAA to be a person that helps launch and land the drone and then make sure that the air is safe to operate in. And then from an alternate site in Rockville, we'll have pilots, remote operators that will be flying the drone after it takes off from the building. And they will fly to an emergency call and then back and they'll land. They may deviate to respond to other calls, but they're not going to be up just driving around in the air looking for things. So it's going to be to and from emergency calls for police service. It may also be if the police are involved in assisting the fire department with a car accident or something like that, we may be able to get overhead and assist with, yeah, it looks like someone's injured and maybe help request some different resources to try to help people. One of the biggest pieces of this technology, and I mentioned earlier, is the reducing response times. When we look at the average response times, the larger window is, it takes about 11 seconds for our 911 operators on average to answer a call coming into the 911 center, and about 2 minutes to process the information, right? Where are you at? What's going on? Trying to go through the script that our dispatchers do to ensure accurate information is gathered. And then they dispatch that emergency call to the police. When we look in our 3rd district, our 4th district, for the emergency lights and sirens calls, we're looking at a response time of about 4.5 to 5.5 minutes to get to those scenes. Could be quicker, sometimes depending where the officer is. So could be, 4 or 5 minutes to get a police officer on the scene of an emergency, a robbery, a violent act, things of that nature. Where this program is hugely successful is, this is a screenshot from when we were in California. There's a program called Live 911. What that allows is when someone calls 911, we, as in the drone first responder unit, will be able to hear the call as soon as the dispatcher picks up the phone. So when someone calls and they say, you know, I've been robbed at George Avenue and Colesville Road. Now, remember, the dispatcher is going to take another 2 minutes or so potentially to gather that information to send an emergency response by a police officer. By us hearing that with this program, we can immediately launch the drone to respond to that scene. So essentially, we could be overhead of an event at the same time that officers are being physically dispatched. That's how this program is so cutting edge with reducing the amount of time it takes for us to get to a call, because we're listening to the 911 call, not waiting for it to be dispatched. We're hearing it live, which enables us to move quicker. This is a picture of a drone taking off. After that 911 call comes in, the drone takes off and responds directly to the emergency, wherever that might be. Mr. Sterling, you asked about the drone, what it looks like. This is an example of a product that would be utilized in the drone as first responder program. It's about 20 pounds, so it's not a big, it resembles nothing of the military or anything of that nature. This is a commercial drone. This is the same drone that's utilized by companies that do, power line work, other industries involving commercial use of drones. This is a commercially available drone that we would use for public safety. It flies up to 51 miles an hour, and our flight time is just under an hour. And when we use this drone, we'll be flying between 300 and 400 feet above ground or above the tallest building while we're conducting operations. So it's going to be pretty high up in the sky. It's not very loud. At that altitude, someone on the street or on their balcony enjoying a beverage or reading a book is not going to hear the drone. They're pretty high up there, and the noise would not be detectable, especially with the ambient street noise generally of the central business districts. This is what a pilot console looks like. This is Santa Monica, California. We had the opportunity to kind of observe a pilot utilizing this technology while we were there. And this is going to be an example of how an incident can be de-escalated with this DFR program. Santa Monica police were dispatched to a subject with a gun call. So you can imagine the police being dispatched to this and their mindset and what they're thinking while they're responding to an individual that potentially is armed behind a commercial establishment here. When the drone gets on scene overhead, it's able to zoom in. It has a very powerful camera, and they were able to zoom in and see that this individual had an object that looked like a gun, but it was actually a lighter. So it was not a real gun. And so they were able to broadcast that information to the officers that were still responding to the scene. And on the bottom left, there's a picture of some officers that are down by a telephone pole. They're getting live updates from the drone pilot, who is a sworn police officer operating this device. And he's telling them it does not appear to be a gun. It appears to be a lighter. And they were able to kind of de-escalate their mindset and their approach to the individual while they still had to investigate and they were still cautious. They had a de-escalated response to that. They didn't come running at the individual with their guns out. They weren't yelling at them to get on the ground. It was a very, more calm approach because the drone was able to provide that safety information that it did not appear to be a gun in their hand. So the ability for the drone to get overhead and zoom into an incident and provide that real-time information is going to be huge for de-escalating, for giving more information so officers can make better decisions. The other thing that these agencies told us while we were in California is sometimes they get dispatched to mental health calls or other calls or suspicious persons calls. There may be, two individuals sitting on a park bench that the citizen believes they're up to no good, right? So the drone's able to fly over, get there before officers would, and assess the scene. And frequently they've said, and I have another slide with some statistics, that they were able to say, hey, we're observing these individuals. They're not doing anything illegal. This does not warrant a physical law enforcement officer to make contact. And they were able to still respond to the citizens' concerns, and they were able to avoid having an officer make contact with those individuals. So it can reduce unnecessary contacts. It can also help with the short staffing. Potentially, there may be calls that are holding, that a citizen's calling 911, and we don't have officers available. We might be able to try, if we can, to address it with the drone. There's going to be a big transparency and piece to this. We're going to be, Chula Vista is going to help us if we were to implement this program to make our own, what I'm calling a transparency page. It'll be a page that members of our public can go to. Each day it gets updated, and it will provide information on the number of calls we've responded to. In this case, this is Chula Vista, California. So their program, 3,762 times the time that I pulled this picture, the drone avoided the necessity of a patrol unit to respond to that scene. So that's the efficiency piece and the unnecessary contacts. Also, the average response time, just over 1.5 minutes. So once they launched the drone, it's overhead in about 1.5 minutes on a lot of these calls in Chula Vista. The other thing that we'll be looking to do is for transparency purposes, because again, this program is to respond to police calls for service. We want the public to know that you can see every time we fly. Now, it'll be updated the day after. It's not going to be real time. We're also going to modify the locations to give a more vague address to protect the privacy of people. But this is an example from Chula Vista. They'll tell you, they responded to 1200 Broadway for a subject causing a disturbance at 12:05 p.m. And you can see the flight pattern, and that is updated the following day. So we're going to be very transparent. It's a very transparent program. How many times we're flying, what are we flying for? And then obviously, we also are going to be publishing this data not only on a website, but in an annual report that's accessible to the public. So that is really quick, a kind of snapshot brief summary of what this proposed program is and what it does. And I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you. Excellent overview. That was very succinct. Thank you, Captain. Mr. Ricks and then Sharif Ranson.
Yes, sir. Thank you. That looks great. Looks like a great program. When you say no facial recognition, in other words, that means that if somebody's robbing a bank, you're not going to identify them from what you see on the drone?
So facial recognition is a software that you input an image into, and it looks to match that image with another person.
Right.
So this is different. So this is going to be real time. If someone commits a bank robbery and we get a description of the suspect, we will zoom in to be able to see if that individual matches the description, but it's used in a real time manner versus being used to take images for the facial recognition. So
if I can interrupt, sort of what the facial recognition is the comparison to a database of images for the purpose of naming people in some sense. And so this,
and I understand that, but I was just wondering, hey, you got a bank robber, the drone, can see them and all that, might help pick him up real quick. As one that you've been looking for on several occasions, so that's all I was asked. The other part was, I saw in the video, there were some power lines there. So, how do you recognize those when we had a pilot who ran into a power line right here?
Well, that's a great question. And so I asked the same question when I went to California, because I want to know the safety features of this. Right. So the software that we use to pilot the drones is called DroneSense Remote. And within DroneSense Remote, you establish a geofence of your operating area. And within the geofence, you can create little geofences around objects for safety, and it will not allow the drone to fly into these designated areas. So for example, in downtown Silver Spring, I believe it's the World Bank building, has a really tall antenna on the top.
Right.
You would draw a
Right.
geofence around that so that it will not permit the drone to fly within a certain distance of that. So there's a series of safety precautions that are all done through geofencing that get loaded in. Power lines. We also would geofence the boundary with the District of Columbia because we can't fly into Washington, D.C. And things of that nature.
Excellent, excellent. Sheree Branson.
Well, my last question real quick is,
I'm
does it
sorry, Sheree.
talk back audio? In other words, can you speak to an individual from the drone?
Not with this program. The DFR program has no audio sharing in either way. It's just a higher altitude monitor response drone.
Thank you. Excellent questions, Vernon. Sheree Branson.
Hi, yeah, I have sort of a series of questions about this. One, and I'm just gonna say them all at once and you can figure out, which ones to answer. The first question is what kind of calls would trigger the deployment of the drone? Second, why are the, I guess, bases, if you will, only in Silver Spring and Wheaton? Because we do have other CBDs, and we do have other population. We do have other areas that have a density of population. How will the physical reports be generated based on the drone's observations? Because if police show up, there's going to be some sort of physical report generated. And finally, in the other jurisdictions that use this technology, what do you all have you all considered, and what any complaints or concerns from the community that may have been occasioned by the use of this technology? And if so, what, if not, why not? And if so, what processes or procedures are you putting in place that would make such complaints or concerns not occur in Montgomery County?
Great. I'm going to kind of go and
if I may, Captain, perhaps Ty, your questions might tag on or overlap, and then the captain can address all of those questions. If Sheree, if you have no objection, if that's okay.
That's fine.
Ty, you want to ask your questions now as well? And so that the captain can respond to all of them.
I think he's muted.
Ty, can't hear you.
Can you hear me now, sir?
Yes, thank you. Go
Okay,
ahead.
great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sheree covered several of the questions that I had, but in addition to those, I want to follow up with two others. First, how many man hours does it take to effectively manage this device? And also, is there a possibility of this device being utilized in cases regarding investigations and surveillance? Would the department consider using it for those purposes? Maybe not being the initial idea behind it, but certainly, it is a device that could be utilized in that manner. So thank you.
Great, appreciate it.
Thank you, Ty. And I think the last question I would just tack on is, Captain, will there be like a function code type of policy document created that would be available for, you know, this program that might in some way address some of these kinds of questions? Thank you. Go ahead, please.
Great. Okay, I'm going to just go in reverse. I wrote everything down so I won't miss anything. But Mr. Chair, yes, so function code MCPD function code 460 is our UAS drone policy. It will be available to the public in full transparency. It will cover a lot of questions about what we can fly for, what we can't, what we do with the video, and training requirements and things like that. So yes to that. The question about investigation and surveillance missions for the drone as first responder, that is not what this program is designed for. This program is designed to respond and assist officers with police calls for service and other emergencies. We do have an existing drone program, and under our existing program, we do not use drones for surveillance. Detectives and investigators will have to use other techniques to conduct surveillance if that is warranted or legally allowed. We also, the only time we use our existing drone program in any investigative way is we do have a tactical mission where we may fly a drone during police search warrants. We also use it to do search and rescue missions. So if we're looking for someone that's lost, or if we're looking for a suspect that might be in a certain environment, we can use our existing drone program for that. But this new project would not be in that type of mission set. The program that I'm describing to you initially is being proposed as a pilot. So what I mean by that is it would not be permanent. We would do this for a period of time, provide feedback to the community, to the council, to the county executive, and we would evaluate the successes of the program before, as a whole community, we decided what we want to do with it. So during the pilot program, we are proposing to run 2 sites, downtown Silver Spring and downtown Wheaton, which I'll touch on the reasons why. But we're going to be doing 40 hours a week. And now how the hours and days are going to be selected, we are going to look at data on when the busiest calls for service are, when the shortest staffing periods are, when some of the more higher priority calls, if we have robberies or violent acts or things like that. And the fourth piece is we are underway in engagement with the community in these areas. Also, when do people perceive to feel the least safe? So if we can kind of take all those ingredients and mix that up, we'll identify, just for the pilot purposes, these hours and these days where we can operate this technology to try to better an area. The reason why Silver Spring and why Wheaton, you are correct. There are many central business districts, many populated areas. Again, this is just a pilot. For example, Chula Vista has 4 sites that they're operating all over their city. We're just proposing to start initially with 2 so we can gather data. But let's say, for argument's sake, this is a successful program, the community, everybody wants it. We can put one in downtown Bethesda, downtown Rockville, Germantown, Silver Spring, Wheaton. So it ideally can serve many places in the community. Why Silver Spring? Why Wheaton? We're looking at our busiest areas with some of our more significant calls for service and crime, coupled with some areas that are significantly hurting with police staffing. So we want to see how this program will help the efficiency and the short staffing in those patrol areas. But other areas are certainly on the table if we decide to go that route. What type of calls? Really, the pilot is going to be in the room, in the pilot operations, flight operations room, listening to those 911 calls when they come in. And they're going to be screening for calls that they think would be the most efficient use of the drone. And so those can vary from suspicious individuals to a theft just occurred, to a robbery, to a car accident, to someone that might be in mental crisis. Can we fly over and say, hey, they're not actively hurting anybody, they're not hurting themselves. Let's go ahead and divert this to our mobile crisis team. Maybe we can avoid a police officer response. So we're going to be looking at running as many calls as we can during the pilot phase to kind of fine tune how things are working, but we want to get the most bang for our buck. The physical reports based on the drone. So every time the drone launches to respond to a call, they're going to be, there's a CAD designator, like a unit number that will be attached to each call. So there'll be a record. And also each report, each flight will have a log, and the pilot will fill out a log to document what the flight was. So there will be records. If a call for service does necessitate a human police officer, the drone pilot can help provide information to that officer that could be included in a formal police report should one be required. So there's going to be documentation whether or not a human police officer makes it to the scene. And the last question about the concerns, yes, I did ask this question, and yes, we did bring back some information on how we're going to do here. One was the concerns about when the drone takes off and flies to an emergency, where's that camera? And is it recording? And is it recording people as it flies over people's balconies and things of that nature? So that was a great question that came out of the community in California. And so we're going to steal the idea of what they're doing out there. When the drone takes off, the camera will not be pointed down where the public is. The camera is going to be up, and as we get close to the emergency, then the camera is going to come down, similar to a police officer kind of turning on the street and what they're seeing and what their camera is seeing. So we're going to try to only use the camera as we get close to the emergency to reduce any privacy, unnecessary privacy, kind of viewing, if you will. And we're only using drones where we're lawfully allowed to do such and recording in lawful manners. The other thing going on right now is the request. There's been some requests for video footage. And so where we're working with that is that's when we said we're going to just follow our existing Maryland Public Information Act requests and how we're treating other body cam video. Chula Vista currently is going back and forth on releasing some video to, I believe, a news outlet. So in order to avoid that, we're just going to make it consistent with our existing policy.
Captain, thank you. I see follow-up questions from Mr. Ricks and Mr. McKinney and probably Cherie. Mr. Ricks?
Yes, sir. The other thing is, I know that you have portable cameras or stationary cameras in downtown Silver Spring. We've had several incidents in garage. And I'm just wondering if, in fact, when I think there's a group that monitors those cameras, right? And if they do, and no service call has come in, but they recognize through monitoring those cameras that there is an incident, can the drone be sent up? And do we have gunshot sensors in the area that the drone could respond to?
So Mr. Ricks, great question. Yeah, so I would label that what's called a police generated call for service. If an officer observes activity or wants to initiate an investigation, that would be allowable for the DFR to respond to assist. So 911 calls, police generated calls, those would all be good. The drone doesn't interface with any gunshot detection software or program that would be in use out there. But we would have communication abilities with officers and with the Crime Information Center. If they see something, we could respond and assist.
Excellent questions, Mr. Ricks. Ty?
Yes, Captain, two questions real quick. And one is, what do you anticipate the annual cost of this program to be? And how do you plan on it? Maybe you spoke to it, I didn't hear it. how do you plan on gauging the community response to it? Because that gets back to, privacy issues, which I heard you speaking about before.
Yeah, so right now we're planning September 12th. We're going to have a large community event at the Wheaton Rec Center, I believe, in conjunction with Council Member Fanny Gonzalez. So we'll be presenting to the community and having a listening session. We're working with Council Member Katz and Stewart to do a similar community function in early September in downtown Silver Spring at Veterans Plaza. And as we go through this pilot program, what our plans are is to be putting out information, obviously through our transparency site, reports to council, to the Public Safety Committee, and then also hosting additional community events where we can provide updates and inform the community as we're doing it to what's happening. And obviously the public would be able to go see these things on the website. The other thing we're going to do is we're creating a email website directly. It's a MCPD UAS. We're going to create an email address that the community can email us directly with questions or concerns, so we can engage with community members direct through email as well. The other piece of your question, the costs for the pilot to run 2 sites, we're going to be requesting $350,000 for the year. And what that money entails is for this pilot, there's costs to staff a person on each rooftop of the site. We have a vendor that is providing those services, and the initial infrastructure and the cost of the 2 drones in order to do this. Now, in subsequent fiscal years, if we as a community as a whole of county decide to do this, those costs could fluctuate. The FAA is currently, we're bound to their regulations. There is future possibility of technology replacing the human on the roof, so that could lower our costs in the long term. So, but the initial request is for $350,000 to run 2 sites, 40 hours a week, and that includes the staffing costs.
And Captain, you mentioned something about it runs, I think you said, when charged for like 55 minutes. How long, say for example, when it's completed its charge, how long does it take you to get it recharged so it can be redeployed?
So on the rooftop site, there's going to be a bunch of batteries charging. So when that drone lands, the person on the roof will just swap out the batteries and it can go right back up. So it's going to be very quick to that. And I saw 2 questions, Mr. Chair, if I can answer them from the chat.
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, the date for the Wheaton community event, September 12th. And the Montgomery County Police has published it on their social media, as well as, I believe, Council Member Fanny Gonzalez, and we will be republishing that flyer as well. But I believe it starts at 7 p.m. Down in Wheaton for that one. The other question about, typically the FAA doesn't allow drones over 55 pounds to operate over people. So our drone will not be over 55 pounds. We'll also be operating under a jurisdictional COA and also a blanket COA, and also our pilots are all Part 107 certified. So we'll be able to conduct emergency public safety operations within the regulations. I believe Ms. Branson has your hand up.
Yeah, I do have follow-up
Shri.
questions, as Eric said. So I have 2 follow-up questions. One is, how long will the pilot run? I mean, what is the anticipated time frame for this? And the second question is, what will be your metrics to determine effectiveness? Because I don't, I think before we start something, we ought to know how we're going to say it was a good idea. So what will have you all determine those metrics? And if so, how will they be gathered?
Yep. So for metrics, a couple of things. We're going to be tracking very much various forms of data. Response times, how long it's taking us to get over an emergency. Times that we were able to handle a call without having to have an officer physically respond. And then what we're going to do is we're going to calculate the cost of a police officer, the car, the equipment, and we can convert that into an hourly figure. And we can assess how much money potentially we're saving in not having to have an officer respond to that particular incident. And then we're going to capture all the success stories, right? If there was a scene that was de-escalated that could have gone one way, but because of the information provided to the officers, it was able to provide better information for decision making, we'll capture those success stories. Apprehensions, like let's say someone committed a crime and the DFR was able to observe the suspect, monitor the suspect, and direct officers in. So all those types of data sets we want to capture to be able to show, is this technology worth the money we're putting into it? When it starts, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, let me just throw this in too. So that's effectiveness. And you probably have some other things too, but I wanted to also understand, will complaints even be possible with this drone? Will civilians be able to say, you know, I got a problem, you know, this drone, you know, came on my balcony, you know, I mean, will there be a mechanism for that also? Because I think that needs to be a part of any effectiveness review.
Yeah, absolutely. So we will have an email address that's going to come right to Special Operations Division staff that residents or community members can email in. But also, if someone wants to file a complaint, the standard process, whether it's PAB, whether it's directly to Internal Affairs, every flight we fly is tracked. So if it's us, we'll know about it and we'll be able to say. Now, if it's not us, after September 21st, there's a what's called a remote ID law that's going into effect. The FAA will be able to identify other drones in airspace and who those drones belong to. So we'll be able to dispel or confirm pretty easy if someone, and answer their concerns, of course, on what we were doing and why. When does it start? So our proposal is we are going to propose in September to the council to consider this program to pilot during fiscal year 24. If the council deems that appropriate, we could start as soon as October 1st. Obviously the start time is depends on the decision making. And we would pilot that through the rest of fiscal year 24, and then we would reapproach the community, the council, and all of our partners for potential continuation into fiscal year 25.
Bernie, can this be the last question?
Yeah, when we have a significant accident, say, and first responders come out, will the fire department also be able to respond, or can the drone be used for that? And will it be used, say, over the Beltway, which is a state road, and 270? Is that possible? Or will you be
Very creative questions. Very insightful. Captain?
Yep. So the short answer is yes, we can respond to emergency calls that involve fire rescue, car accidents, things of that nature. And as long as the roadway is in the operational area for the drone, each drone site's limited probably to about 3 miles in every direction from the launch and landing site. If it's in that operational area, we can use it to respond to any roadway that's within that operational area.
Thank you.
Captain, thank you so much. Fascinating. I think all of us were very delighted that you took the time to present this to us and answer our questions. I think probably we may have additional questions that we may send to you. But very, very grateful again to you to come this evening to speak to us. Ty, Susan, do we have perhaps 5 to 8 minutes to discuss the virtual reality training?
Yes, I need to make sure that Captain Satinsky can return. Can you give me 1 minute?
I am here. No,
Oh, okay,
I'm
there
here.
you go. Okay.
Captain, so you know what the questions are already that we wanted to ask regarding the status of the virtual reality training program?
Yes, and I'm not, this is what I can say. Currently, the grant that has been procured for this project is in the procurement phase with the Office of County Attorney and the Office of Procurement. And because of that, I cannot discuss any of the company or anything else that we're using. There's confidentiality rules until it's finalized and awarded. So I do apologize.
Okay.
But the plan moving forward is once that contract, if it is finalized, which we all hope it is, that the training and deployment will occur in 2024. But that's all unfortunately, that's all I can really provide at this point.
Ty, Cherie, any questions that you want to see if they're within the scope of what the captain can say?
Yes, I wanted to see if the captain could tell us a little bit about what I understand, Captain, that you're going to seek to acquire the Axon system. And I'm
Mr. McKinney, like I said earlier, I can't discuss that, whatever the contractor, the name is, I'm not allowed to discuss based on county procurement rules, confidentiality.
Okay. All right. Well, what do you anticipate the system that you're looking at? What issues are you seeking to address with that system specifically? I know that prior to acquiring the system, the majority of the time you were using human scenarios to provide the opportunity for training officers to respond to real life situations. So what do you see as the best usage of this system?
If it's, depending on how the system's configured, the ultimate goal is to be able to provide officers with real life scenarios that are provided by police certified instructors that can put them through certain tests where they can be judged and provided positive and negative criticisms based on their interactions, based on real world events. The current system, or I should say the system that I utilized, let's say when I was a young officer, was called FATS. And for the life of me, I cannot remember the acronym, what it stands for. But it was an older video style system that did a similar thing, but it was jarring, it stuttered, you could anticipate certain things. This is going to be much less than that. This is going to be real time style, high grade, almost video game style system with real life people, not video game folks, but real life people where they can interact one-on-one without the lag, without the anticipation, where we can see body language, body movement. We can discuss what the officer said, what they did, how they approached it. That's what we're looking to do with the system.
Okay, one of the things that this commission was concerned about was the issue of implicit bias. And we were looking for a system that would appropriately address that issue in particular. How do you anticipate using this system to address that issue?
That's a great question, Mr. McKinney, but I can tell you there are no real scientific tests for the implicit bias angle of things. We would like to have something where we can show, hey, does this officer, does this employee show that? I don't know to what extent this particular system may do that at this point, and how we would gauge it. That's going to have to be something that once, if the system is purchased and deployed, those are metrics that would be placed into the system as we build it out.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Hi, thank you very much for staying on top of this. Captain Satinsky, thank you very much for sharing what you're able to share at this time. Excuse me, I see Cherie Branson's hand. Cherie?
Yeah, because you said procurement, and that's like the magic word for me. So I understand the process and your inability to discuss certain things. So I'm wondering, but what you can discuss is whether this procurement was done through an RFP whether it was sole source. Can you provide the RFP? Can you provide the statement of work that you know, and the deliverables that were a part of the RFP, or whatever procurement vehicle you may have used?
That is a great question. I can't answer at the moment. If it was an RFP, to be honest, I was not part of this process. If it was an RFP, it would be publicly available on our website, which anyone can search with all the parameters that would be as such. If it came in under a grant application, which is what this one did, I do know that would also be provided publicly. I don't know. I do not believe we use sole source on that, but I can absolutely double check in the morning, and I can get back to Ms. Farag and she can provide it to the committee.
Yeah, I mean, if you know, I understand it's publicly available, but you know, I also know that it's not easy to find unless you know exactly what you're looking for. So if you could provide that, that would be great. You know, because then we wouldn't have to run around looking for it, because you probably have much better access to it than we do.
It's funny you say that. I actually have the exact same access you do. So I will go ahead and take a look in the morning, and I will send something out, like I said, to Ms. Farag, and she can forward it off to the PAC.
Thank you.
Sri, thanks very much. Captain Satinsky, as always, we very much appreciate your help looking at these issues. I think we're ready now to turn our attention to the STEP Act letter. Robin had drafted a letter. We've got some excellent comments from Susan, from Christy, from Ty, and I shared then a draft that I called version 4, addressed to President Glass and the members of the council. And on the first page, there were concerns very much about the paragraph discussing the conclusion that there is regarding the conclusion. We're not concluding that the disparities are the result of racism. There was we wanted to be more correct an error in terms of how we characterized Chief Jones' response at our meeting regarding traffic stops. Those are two areas in particular, and at the bottom of page 1 and the first paragraph of page 2, and then the question of the provision in the STEP Act dealing with consent searches, and that is addressed to some extent on the third page in a paragraph about concerns about the provisions limiting the police officer to request a driver's consent. So I want to now recognize I see Sheree Branson.
Yeah, I need to get into the letter, but I do want to point out that I think it was Christy said that she got knocked off and she needs to be let back in. I just wanted to point that out so that she could be let back in.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Sheree. Ty, the way in which I see Christy, so perhaps as soon as she is, Christy.
Sorry about that. I just rejoined.
Great. So I see Lori's hand. So I'll recognize Lori for questions, comments on the letter.
Thanks. I just want to comment on the change we made concerning the language that in relation to racism and overt racism on the part of the police. You know, the new wording of it, you know, it seems to go a little bit too far on this. I would not want to say that I personally would conclude that that there aren't these disparities. I'd like to keep it more neutral than that. I certainly don't want to imply that there are, but I don't want to imply that we have come to some kind of conclusion that there aren't racist police officers, to be blunt about it. I would prefer to go back to the original write-up on this, but you know, if we are going to change the wording, I wonder if we can tone it down just a bit and just say something along the lines of, we have not concluded that these disparities are the result of overt racism within MCPD, and then just zap out the next sentence there, not suggesting there are actively racist police officers. You know, we're getting, I feel like we're going too far in terms of giving them a pass on the idea that there might be racist police officers. So I'd kind of like to back off that a bit. So that's my 2 cents, and it's not something I'll fall on my sword over, but if we could tone it down, I'd be more happy. Thanks.
So just to summarize, your sense is in the paragraph that begins importantly, the second sentence you feel is in some sense more than we need to sort of finesse the point that we're not making the claim that there are officers who are racists by talking about the fact that there are these disparities in traffic stops.
You know, I don't even want to go that far. I want to, you know, basically say we haven't made any conclusions about whether there are racist officers or not. You know, I don't think we have. So that's why I like the first wording, the way it was before, better.
Okay, Ty and then Christy.
First of all, I agree with Lori regarding that issue that she was just addressing. I think it could have been said certainly more subtly, and there's no reason for us to offer an opinion, especially regarding something that we have not fully explored or come to some kind of conclusion on. So I certainly agree with that. The other thing, I'll get back to what I was talking about, which was close to my heart, was the issue regarding consent searches in the act itself, in the STEP Act.
For the sake of the cogency of our discussion, let's stay on the question. I want, of course, your point is very important, Ty. We're not going to lose it. But Christy, I want to stay focused just.
Okay, I'll reserve my comments until you finish.
Christy, would you like, can I recognize you? I see your hand on.
Yeah, I just wanted to acknowledge that, you know, the comments with the new language were my suggestion, and they were merely an attempt to put something on paper that was a little bit less in your face than the first version, which I felt was, you know, maybe a little bit unnecessarily abrasive. And maybe I'm a little too sensitive in that, but I feel like I'm satisfied with what Eric revised it to in the version that he sent out most recently. I'm also, you know, open to other suggestions like deleting the second sentence.
So I'd like to resolve this because I think it's an important issue, obviously, in the whole thrust of the letter. And, you know, this is a, so unfortunately, Robin, who was the original author of the letter, isn't able to be with us. He's in the United Kingdom. It's early in the morning. It's, you know, very, very late at night there now. And so
to say something just a little bit more pointed, I think the point of our letter and of this like exercise was to look at the data and show that the data points towards some disparities, right? And by introducing like the concept of the potential that there are racist police officers, I think it distracts from the systematic pieces of this that we're trying to get at. And I think that it's something that I just think it's something we don't need to say in this particular letter.
Good. Lori,
Well,
Yes.
going back to the wording, I mean, we don't have any evidence one way or another, whether they're racist police officers or not. But in our population as a whole in the United States, there are racist people. There could be, there could not be, so, we have, making it so that we're saying something about the fact that we have not reached any conclusions about whether they're racist police officers or whether there is overt racism within MCPD. I can't quite come up with the words, but I don't want to let them off the hook, if so to speak, in terms of whether there are racist police officers. I certainly hope they're not, and I'd like to believe that they're not, but I'm not there yet.
Eric did change that language in the version that was sent out. So I just want to make sure we're all looking at the same version of the letter in version 4.
I have version 4 here. Yeah. As I said, this is not something I'm, going to fall on my sword over, but I wonder if, maybe I could try to craft something and send it around and see if that might be acceptable. I don't want to, move the direction too much the other way either. I just wanted to make sure that we're not making a statement that says we're concluding that there aren't racist police officers. Because I don't think we can make that conclusion one way or another.
No, that's not the statement we want to make. I see Ty's hand, and then I thought I saw Cherie's hand.
No, I just wanted to say real quick that I'm in agreement with Lori on that. I thought we ought to remain neutral on that. There's no requirement that we address that either way. Either we believe it or we don't. We should just remain neutral.
Yeah,
Cherie.
and I agree with this also. I understand I understand wanting to say it. I also understand that it is potentially a bad idea for a lot of reasons. So so I would suggest that, okay, so the sentence in the previous paragraph is talks about imbalance in traffic stops and that Black and Hispanic drivers are stopped and ticketed at far higher rates than white drivers. That's where that paragraph ends. I would suggest that that we just get rid of those first two sentences, period. That the sentence that starts importantly and the sentence that starts the PAC. And instead we say the PAC has concluded that these disparities raise significant questions that MCPD should be prepared to address. And I think that's a lot cleaner, if you will. And it, because we've already said, what our problem here is. Anyway, that's my suggestion.
Lori, how does that sound to you?
Yeah, I like that. I think that could solve the problem. We're not saying anything one way or another, just going into the fact that, we see a pattern here that should be addressed. So, I'm good with that.
I concur.
Okay,
Yay. Glad we're agreeing.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think I think fundamentally we're all in agreement on a lot of this. It's just a matter of how
Yeah.
it is worded on the paper.
okay. We will make that change. I took a note of that. Let's, should we move ahead then to the discussion of the consent to search and how that should be framed or restricted? Ty, you're
Okay,
right.
so I will, Mr. Chairman, I guess I'll take a third bite at the apple. So I will put it this way. I just wanted clarity on my position on that in particular, because throughout my career, I noted that to be a very useful tool, investigative tool, especially for officers who had a great deal of experience. Sometimes when you can't fully establish probable cause to request because there's just something not quite right with what you're dealing with on the street, that you would ask for consent to search. What we talked about when Councilman Jawando was with us, he said he would be amenable to an adjustment in language. And I think one way that we could adjust the language is make it more specific that the officer is requesting permission to conduct a search. I think that would be most helpful. It's no different really than what we do with Miranda when we read someone their rights about speaking. So if the officers were required, in other words, to be more specific and say to the motorist, for example, that you have a right to refuse to give permission for consent for a consent search without penalty, for example. That would be more specific language to alert them that they have the right to decline, because the issue that we're dealing with is whether or not a motorist is intimidated by the virtue of being stopped by an officer in uniform. So in essence, I just wanted clarity on that.
That, Mr. Ricks and then Lori.
Yeah, just very quickly, isn't that a part of the law now? That when they ask for the consent to search?
They don't have to make an explanation. An officer can say, I'd like to search your car. Is that okay with you? They don't have to say, and they're not required to say, you do not have to consent to my request. And if you do not consent, no, there's nothing I can do about it. Or you're not going to be detained, or there isn't further language like that.
But if the officer has significant reason to do the search, I'm just thinking back when they stopped the car and the guy had, what was it, 20 pounds of
Fentanyl or something like that.
fentanyl and guns and all this stuff in the car. And if the guy said no, he drives off with his fentanyl and stuff, and 10 minutes later, somebody's dead. I just think that they need to search when they feel the need to search.
That's not the Constitution.
No.
Cops do not have the power to search you based on their hunch, based on.
No, and I understand that.
And so, the law attempts to draw a distinction between situations where there are articulable grounds for saying there's probable cause or reasonable suspicion, and therefore I am going to conduct a search because I have a basis. The context we're talking about here is only the case where an officer has made a stop. There isn't any particular fact that he is presented with that amounts to probable cause. He may have radar, he may have his instincts, he may have his intuition, and he then as using his intuition, may say, well, I'm gonna take a chance here. You know, do you mind if I search your car? You don't have to let me. And the person may say, oh, well, okay. Just as people answer questions after they've been given their Miranda warnings.
Well, like in the case of if he or she smells marijuana now, that's not a probable cause to search the car, is it?
No, correct.
Because of the change in the law.
That's correct.
No, it's not because of the change in the law regarding marijuana. It's because the law changed regarding the sniff test because unlike other things, a smell is evanescent, you know, so it can disappear after a certain time. There's no way to document in court that a smell, in fact, was there.
Okay.
And the only documentation that is possible, it becomes the statement of the officer, you know, and so what you have then is a bootstrapping of, I smelled it, I said I smelled it, so I smelled it. And that kind of bootstrapping should not be a constitutionally viable thing. So it has nothing to do, it is still illegal to be impaired on marijuana if you're driving a car. It is still, so no, it's not about the change in the state marijuana laws. It is about an understanding of the true nature of this bootstrapping. And I just want to back up for a minute on this consent search stuff, because if it would be helpful to me if someone would point out exactly in the letter, the points that are exactly in the letter that are at issue here. What is the language that is the problem? I mean, because personally, I think that an officer should be able to do a consent search. May surprise people that I believe that, but I also believe that that it should be a true consent. A true consent does not come without a protocol, right? I mean, I did a lot of work on informed consent and medical stuff and whatnot. And so a true consent requires a protocol. And the protocol is, just as Ty talked about, for instance, the Miranda warnings are a protocol. The officer has to say these things. They say them so much that most people, you know, if you watch enough crime shows, I could give somebody their Miranda warnings, right? So the question for me becomes, what protocol should we suggest? You know, it's not enough to say, you know, we think they should actually get real consent. I mean, we should take this opportunity to suggest that if the officer wants to conduct a consent search, there should be a pre-printed card that the officer must read to the driver or whoever, you know, it is, and all of that, you know, the reading of all that will be on the body cam. And so it will be, anybody who comes later will be able to see the reading and see whether and make some intelligent conclusions about whether true consent actually exists.
Good. Lori and then Ty. Very helpful, Sherry, in framing this for us. Very helpful. Lori.
And Sherry, I love your idea of them having a card to read so that everybody gets a uniform understanding of what they're being requested. I like that a lot, but I also think that the officer, and not necessarily right at the window where the driver can hear what he's saying. I want the officer to speak into his body camera and say, here is the specific reason why I am requesting this search. I want the person to have to articulate exactly what it is. And it shouldn't be because my intuition says that this is that this could be a productive thing to do. I'd like to have more articulation, and I'd like it to be recorded so that there can be some kind of review of that if needed. That's it.
Thank you, Lori. That certainly goes beyond what the Constitution now requires.
Mhm.
Ty.
Okay.
Well, I would disagree. I was going to say I would disagree with what Lori's last comment was, simply because if an officer establishes probable cause, there's no need for consent to search.
That's true.
So that's automatically alleviated. What Cherie was talking about is what I was getting to, and that is that the language ought to be codified consistent with how we issue Miranda warnings so that people will know and be alert, because the problem is people are intimidated and don't understand that they have a right to refuse. However, that is, like Cherie noted, is an investigative tool that I, for one, do not want to completely take away from the officers.
So I think certainly Ty and Sherry, I think, are sort of largely in agreement. They want this tool to be available. They want the problem with the STEP Act was that there was a bar to asking for a search, except if it says unless probable cause or reasonable suspicion, quote, arise during the stop. And it was very unclear to me what that actually meant. And it was, what does arise during the stop mean? Did that exclude, and that also, I mean, it has in some sense, it's no longer the kind of it's not the situation that sort of a specific of defining the nature of the request. It bars the request and essentially seems to eliminate all potential consent searches and says there shall be no consent searches. The only searches shall be upon the officer finding that there's probable cause or reasonable suspicion to consent an unconsented search. I mean, that seems to be, if I understand the implication of what the STEP Act is trying to get at. And I think there's a sense among a number of us that goes too far, that the police shouldn't be barred from asking from consent. But Lori, you're sort of saying if you're going to ask for consent, at least put your reasons down. Even those would be reasons that aren't reasons that a court would say that constitutes reasonable suspicion, that constitutes probable cause. I'm not sure. I'm not sure that I would go as far as as what you're proposing, Lori. But I mean, that might work. I mean, and I think, in some sense, we're also kind of, we're asking a kind of, really important question about sort of the scope of Fourth Amendment search law, where the question would be, what do other jurisdictions do? How have either courts or other police administrators confronted this problem elsewhere? Because that really would give us at least a little kind of guidance on making the kind of recommendation for a card that Cherie has suggested and that Ty is comfortable with. So perhaps a way to frame it is, rather than we coming up with the language, to say that we recommend that before the council adopts this, that they get the opinion of competent counsel who have reviewed what the practices are in other jurisdictions in order to create a protocol that the officers can rely upon.
Yeah, I like that.
Right. And that is uniform. I think that is sort of our what we're trying to get to, a uniform protocol that, that can be read. Because, we still want people to be able to say no,
Yeah.
but to me, the compromise is you create the protocol, it's uniform, that allows the officer to have the investigative tool, but it also allows the resident to have a clear understanding of what their rights are. And that's, to me, that's what the Constitution requires.
Yeah, but in no case, I would just add that the council or the government should exercise parental authority over the citizen to either give consent or refuse it.
I'm a little confused.
Yeah, I
the
don't
citizen
understand.
has the right to refuse. The citizen now has the resident now has the right to refuse a consent search, because that's what consent is.
If I understand what you're saying, Ty, you're saying that the bill as drafted, the STEP Act as drafted, says we're telling the citizen, you don't ever have to confront this question because officers can't ask you.
Yes.
That's what you kind of mean in terms of the parental kind of thing.
Yes.
Okay. But that's where the compromise comes in, that, we're acknowledging that the consent search is a potentially viable and okay investigatory tool for law enforcement. But we're also saying that, and in that respect, we're saying STEP Act goes a little too far in prohibiting it. Okay.
That's what we're saying.
Okay.
But on the other hand, we are also acknowledging that we do believe that that there is a potential for abuse and that or misuse, maybe that's a better word. There's a potential for misuse. And so there should be a protocol developed that is uniform and that officers must employ to advise a resident of their ability to refuse to give consent.
Vernon.
Like a Miranda warning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Vernon.
I could support that if it talked about the possibility of misuse, as you call it, Sherry, in certain demographic neighborhoods.
I don't know if we have data to support. I agree with you, on a gut level, Vernon, but I don't know if we have data that supports that. And I don't want to say something that we don't have data to support. I think it's probably true, but I don't think we have data to support that.
If you went, and I don't know that this data is available, but I'm sure if you came out and did Potomac, Maryland, you would not have the same demographic of stops as you would if you went into Silver Spring or Wheaton.
Yeah.
You might also have an officer with a a young driver who, you know, and the young driver may feel as intimidated as somebody else, and not understand that they have a right to refuse to consent. And that they
Or even an elderly driver.
or an
You know,
elderly
even,
driver.
you know, you know, not, even an elderly, I mean, because I think, I think that is true on both ends of the age spectrum, that some people are just going to be more intimidated, because that's really what we're trying to get at. We're trying to get at people not feeling intimidated.
Yeah, I
Right.
like that.
And I think that we recognize that being stopped is inherently creates a kind of power dynamic with potential intimidation.
Yes.
That you know, that everybody, I think, when they're stopped, you know, their heart beats a little bit faster. You know, they're just a little, you know, their palms sweat a little bit more, even if they're completely innocent. And so if you're willing to let me take these suggestions, so that we would essentially, I would say that we acknowledge that the consent search is could I go so far as to say it's a valuable tool for law enforcement? Besides,
I would say it's potentially useful.
okay,
I mean,
There we go.
Well,
That's better.
all right,
Mr. Chairman,
Ty,
let's say we recognize it as a valuable investigative tool. However,
yeah. Yeah.
okay,
But wait a minute, can we just go back to one more thing, though? I mean, give me an example or two of something that the police officer would see or notice that would prompt them to ask for the consensual search that is outside the realm of probable cause, or you know, you know, the idea that it's the police officer's intuition, you know, that's also, you know, smacks right in the face of implicit bias. So I need to have some kind of understanding of what those kinds of things might be to, you know, to think that this search would be required. And I guess the other thing is that, you know, if you do have something in the car that you don't want to be found, your likelihood of saying yes to the search is probably much less, right? Anyway.
Ty, and then Vernon.
no, Lori, there doesn't have to be, in some cases, something specific. That's what we're talking about. We're calling to make sure that when probable cause cannot be established by the officer, that based on their experience and knowledge, say, for example, having been a police officer for 20 years, you compile a lot of knowledge and information. And we want them to be able to act on that, but we want them to be able to act on it in a way consistent with respecting the rights of the motorist. And that has not always been the case. For example, a police officer may start walking around looking at your vehicle or at your trunk and may say to you off cuff, "You don't mind if I search your vehicle, do you?" See, that's a leading question. The person there would not understand that they had a right to refuse. That's why we need to codify the language so that it's consistent and the motorist knows specifically that they have a right to say yes or no to the search without penalty.
Well, you know, I'm agreeing with you in terms of having some kind of codified statement that the officer has to make that makes it very clear that you can say no without impunity to the search. I'm still struggling with the idea that that officers have this intuition that is totally free of biases, you know, about anything, about whether you're an old person, whether you're a young person, whether your English is good or not, whether you're, you know, the color, et cetera, that it doesn't have some real potential to play into the situation. I mean, we all make judgments about people all the time, and police officers are human too.
And Lori, that's exactly why we're saying what we're saying. We're saying this because we understand and acknowledge that police
Yeah.
officers have built-in biases. And so we're saying in order to stave that off, we need codified language that
Yeah.
would aid in a situation regarding a search to do just that.
That part I totally agree with you, Ty.
Sheree
So
and then
I'm
Vernon.
good.
Can,
Sheree
can
and then
I,
Vernon.
Lori, let me just, okay, so say say the police officer sees a bag of white pills, right? A little baggie with white pills, 10, 15 white pills in a little baggie. Now that is probably not cool, but it's also not probable cause. But more importantly, what, and the reason it's not probable cause is because those little white pills could be just aspirin. Okay.
Yeah.
It could be just aspirin. Okay.
Yeah.
But I am okay with a police officer seeing the little baggie of, little white pills and saying, hey, can I search your car? Because
Yeah, and see, that's it, Sherry. I want this guy to have to say into his body camera, away from the driver, I'm going to ask for a consent search because I see white pills.
okay, and that's
just
a part
want
of the
that.
protocol. And I think that is we could suggest that is a legitimate part of the protocol.
Yeah, I just want some kind of indication of why this person is going ahead, why the officer is asking for the consent search.
I would push
Because,
against that.
That's exactly what
Okay,
you
well,
just talked about helped me a lot trying to explain what I mean.
okay, then so I think it's important that we get to consensus. I think there's some things that we're just not going to agree on, but I think there is something that we do agree on, and that is we do not support the abolition of consent search that is set forth in the STEP Act. So that's one thing. But we do understand the potential for misuse, and therefore we're suggesting the implementation of a standardized written protocol. And I think we can probably leave it at that.
I agree with that. I'm fine with that.
Ty, are you okay with that?
I'm okay with that. I just didn't want to put an additional burden on the officer to have to speak into their camera. The body camera is already rolling, so let's not, because they're on in a danger zone when they stop someone. So I didn't want to put them in that precarious situation.
Okay, so that is the compromise position. I think, I think we all agree with that.
I see Mr. Rick's hand. I mean, I'm comfortable with it as well, but I want to hear from. Vernon.
I'd like to, I'm an old timer. I'd like to go to our Encyclopedia Britannica, Kate Brewer, and ask her what is taught now in the training program, and what do they work with?
Mr. X, are you speaking specifically for consent searches?
Yes. Mhm.
So actually for recruit training, because they don't have enough experience, we actually don't, during recruit training, discuss how to obtain a consent search, only to state that we never use the phrasing, is it okay if, the leading question that was presented before by Mr. McKinney, we don't do that. We straight up ask them, can I search? We make sure you have to make sure you use the word search your vehicle. Any questions that are asked by the driver, am I free to go? All of those things you must say. You have to make sure you're not going into what's considered a second stop, which has been determined by the Supreme Court as illegal. You cannot extend beyond for the first purpose of the stop, which is if it's a traffic violation. You can't. You have to complete that stop before asking for a consent search. So I have to write the person the citation, and then I have to complete that stop before I ask for a consent search. And if the person asks I'm free to go, we have to, at any point during any interaction, if someone asks if they're free to go, we have to let them know that they are. If they ask what happens to me if I refuse the consent search, we tell them absolutely nothing happens to you, and you're free to go. But again, at the recruit level, we don't practice it with them. They just don't have enough experience. It would be additional training that would occur, that they would attend by various units and outside instructors.
So on that ground level, that looks like where you could have the most mistakes if you did not have some specific training, to those new recruits or what have you.
And our direction is just to make it clear is that they don't ask for consent searches at that level. They don't have the knowledge.
Okay, so would they then say call into the sergeant or the duty officer to say, I have this situation?
No, because that would extend the stop. So you can't do that. You can't extend the stop. If they have it, they have it. So it's something that their field training officer would kind of work with them while the field training officer is there, work with them, show them what it looks like if the situation comes up. If it doesn't, it doesn't. But that's something that would be done in field training, but you can't be on a stop. And unless you're calling for backup, which is very different, but say if I'm the sergeant on the road, I might not be near that traffic stop, that you can't do something that would extend beyond what the court has deemed is the necessary purpose of that original stop.
Okay, so what I'm trying to establish in my mind is when is kindergarten over? In other words, when do they get to the first grade where they can, they feel comfortable? Because to me, where the problem was, the individual officer gets out on the street, it's his or her first week or 2 weeks. And, everything you read in the paper says they don't, if it says an officer had done something, he or she has been on the force for 20 years, or he or she has been on the force for only a year. Only a year, which then indicates to the public that they are not fully engaged or trained well, to handle these kinds of things. So.
I mean, there's a couple ways I could answer that, but I mean, I guess the short way is compared to other professions, right? Would you have surgery by a surgeon who's been a surgeon for only a year? I mean, at some point they have the experience, right? Because they're being observed and trained. And it's during that observation time that they get that experience, and they learn to become comfortable, or they make a traffic stop. And during the first several months, even after they're out of that field training where somebody's riding with you, is that people are there with you on back to back you up almost immediately until really you feel comfortable doing that stuff. It's really just a matter of how many traffic stops you're making. When does it become comfortable? And it's different for everybody, right? So, the basketball player, there's no actual statistical data that says doing something 1,000 times makes you proficient at it. It's false. There's no 10,000 repetitions make you better at something. That's not how it works. It's not how your brain works. So it's really just experience. And so I can't give you like the date that they graduate, if you will. I do like the reference, but I can't give you the date that they graduate from kindergarten. It's really experience and the things that they encounter. So a year on to somebody in a very small, quiet town is very different than a year on at NYPD, LAPD, Montgomery County for the types of calls in the areas that you work. It's experience. I mean, I could have a year on and only run 7 calls a day, or I can work in a busy district in Montgomery County and have a year on and run, thousands of calls. So it's just really just a matter of what you get involved in during that time frame.
I wanted to be clear, if I may, Mr. Chairman. So Captain Brewer, you're saying that your officers cannot exercise or conduct consent searches?
Not at all what I said. What I said is we do not train them, the rookies from the academy. We tell them that as soon as we don't train how to get a consent search during the academy, we give them very, very basic things that you must use the word search. You must ask the question, not the leading question that you said is problematic, which we agree, which is why we train them. That's never a way to go about it. You need to ask a straightforward question. You need to say the word search. And if anybody has any follow-up questions, am I free to go? We tell them, you know, obviously at any point, if somebody asks, am I free to go? You have to tell them legally whether or not they are. We tell them about the difference between an initial stop and a second stop, because that's covered in constitutional law, as well as our traffic stop lectures. But that's not to say that we don't instruct them to. What I'm telling you is we don't instruct it during recruit training, because in recruit training, we have to do 100 level stuff. That's not a 100 level course. We just don't have the time frame with which to go over that, nor do they have the experience on the road to be able to, as you indicated previously, that you have that intuition. They don't have that yet. They haven't hit the road yet. So we can't teach intuition in the confines of the academy. So it's not that we're not training people to do it. We're not training our recruits at that level when they graduate, the intuition that they're going to have when they're on the road to ask for those consent searches.
That just tells me whenever it's utilized, maybe there should be indeed codified language because of the lack of training that you've expressed.
So what?
Yeah.
I would push against the phrase lack of training, though. I don't think that's,
Right, we're not.
it's a conscious decision to not try to teach somebody intuition when they have not experienced, they don't have road experience yet, which I'm sure you understand, as you has indicated a couple of times. So
Dr. Brewer, thank you very much. I mean, what you've said is helpful. I think what I'd like to do is we're way over time. Christina, before I get to Susan, what is our process that allows us to do any kind of business, such as ratify something we've discussed, such as a letter by email before our next Zoom meeting?
You can agree in principle to the terms that you've been discussing, and then we can finalize the draft and circulate that. There doesn't have to be an additional vote on the final draft, but if somebody has a problem with it, then we'd probably bring it back.
Okay. Christina, thank you, Susan. That's helpful.
Yes, I just wanted to speak to what you all were just discussing regarding the rookie officers. And I just want to say out loud, I don't get the impression that it's a lack of training, right? I think that what you were saying was is an appropriate order of events, right? Someone new shouldn't be able to do everything. They're not positioned to do everything. And because of the level of seriousness of a consent search, I would not want a rookie officer who hasn't had the opportunity to train under someone else more experienced to do that. I guess the question I want to ask about it is, well, I know the question I want to ask, do you have rookie officers in positions where they're alone and therefore they would be the only person that would be able to request a consent search? I think that if those who are not trained are always paired with someone, right, then it alleviates and also answers the question as to how they'll get the training, right? Does my question make sense?
Yeah, yes, it absolutely does. And thank you for asking.
And I want to tell you that I think what you're doing, I'm saying the training of them is the appropriate way. It is not a lack of training. I do not interpret what you're saying as that at all. I think that's a mischaracterization of what you're saying.
No, and I appreciate your question. I'm sorry I didn't make it clear. So when they graduate the academy, they do have a field training program, and that field training program is 18 weeks, I believe, mandated. They could go longer. They could go, it's either 15 or 18. I'm sorry, I'm drawing a blank on the length of that, where they're mandated to ride with somebody. That can be extended. And then generally their extension would be minor, but they could be extended depending on how their training is going. And then they are what we call cut loose, and then they do become a solo officer. Now, just as organically, generally what happens is when a new officer makes a traffic stop, we usually make sure that the senior officers will make sure that they go back them up pretty closely just until they feel comfortable. It's just this, not a scary thing, but it's a new thing and you're by yourself. And so officers, we, just do it as a manner of looking out for each other, especially young officers, but you are by yourself after that field training process is over, after those 18 weeks.
So is there a motion that we would send a letter that would incorporate the amendments regarding taking out the two sentences regarding conclusions regarding not drawing conclusions regarding racist police, number one. And number two, that in our discussion of the consent decree language, that we say that we don't support the bill as drafted, that we acknowledge that consent decrees can be valuable investigative tools, but can have the potential to be misused. And that we recommend that the council take the approach of allowing consent searches once a protocol has been developed to guide officers and to make explicit that there is a right to decline the search and that there will be no consequences if that is declined.
I would just say not to guide officers, but to require officers.
To require officers,
Yes.
right?
And
Is there a
so I
motion?
move, Mr. Chairman, that we agree in principle to the changes in the letter that you have just indicated. And that that's the first motion. So somebody needs to second that, I
I'll
guess.
second it.
I
Okay,
second. Thank you.
we gonna vote on it?
All those in favor, please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Those opposed? Mr. Ricks is opposed, and there were any abstentions? And Christina, you're opposed?
No,
Oh, okay, you're an aye? You're
no,
voting?
abstaining.
Christina's abstaining, okay. Very good, okay.
And the
was-
second motion, I'm sorry, so the second motion is, I move that we allow the said revisions to be circulated and approved via email.
So I don't think you can approve something by email because that's a violation of the Open Meetings Act. If you
Oh.
agree in principle to this, we can draft it. And if somebody truly disagrees, then we'll just bring it back to the next meeting.
Okay, well then I don't need to make another motion. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
So
Okay.
Susan, we have a situation where Mr. Ricks is voting no. We have a majority that supports this in principle. What is the power that Mr. Ricks would have when we circulate this in principle to say, I don't think this meets this is not acceptable to me. Does it have to be unanimous, or does it only have to be acceptable to those who voted aye?
I
Well,
don't know.
and-
You're not supposed to vote by email. If
Right.
you as chair wants to bring it back because there's a notable concern with how it's drafted, then we can bring it back in September.
Okay.
Well, but my question then would be, if this is just changing certain things of the letter, we haven't voted on, did we vote on the full letter?
Yes, that we were voting on the letter with the amendments that we had discussed about it as matter of principle.
But I thought
My
those
understanding-
amendments were on just certain parts of the letter.
No,
Because I'm concerned about other parts of the letters that you know,
We haven't
like.
discussed yet. Oh.
To me, well, it looked like to me, we're in a administrative kind of thing. I don't know, I'm I'm wondering, questioning Susan on the fact.
Mr. Ricks, instead of focusing on the administrative question, let me ask you this. Is there other things in this letter you think should be changed
Well,
in the version 4?
see, I hadn't, version 4 was, I haven't seen yet,
Okay, all right.
you know, but I would just, when she says we got to come back to a meeting, a full meeting to discuss some correspondence that we are trying to develop as a group.
The Open Meetings Act would require that if we're going to have a vote. We tried to have a vote and resolve it in our conversation already. And we understood that you voted no.
Right.
And we fully respect that. What we're now trying to understand then is in the motion, in other words, the motion carried and to adopt a letter in principle, and that would be circulated, and that if people saw the circulated draft, said, yes, that's what I thought I was voting for, then it would in effect pass. And if you read it and you said, and that's what I thought I was voting against, it would still pass. I think is sort of how we're essentially what we're trying to move ahead, sort of following a kind of majority rule situation, which, you know, I want to respect what I'm concerned about is I thought you were saying there are other issues.
Yeah, and I don't want to prolong this, but my, like down where we talked about the
so Mr. Rich, the point is I want to improve the letter, and I think that there's a majority that wants to send a letter, and if you have suggestions on how the letter could be improved, that I think would be in order, and because I think we all want to improve the letter. But if you haven't had a chance to read it, then we understand.
well,
We'll welcome your thoughts, you know, as we go forward.
when I say
It's necessary that we do conclude our business this evening.
when I say read it, I mean that now that we've made changes, I have not been able to go back through it. I don't have it in front of me. I didn't pull it up. So,
Right.
but I voted no, and we'll go with that. But I'm concerned within myself on the process that we can't go back and change the letter.
No, that is not the process that I'm proposing. If people say, Eric, you didn't quite capture it, I would attempt to revise it. I want to capture what the majority has discussed now for almost an hour.
But what I understand Susan to say, we couldn't discuss it until September meeting.
No, that's not my understanding at all,
Nope.
Bernard. What Susan is saying is that we cannot discuss it via email. Okay, that does not mean, first of all, that we need to discuss it at all, because we've already agreed to approve the letter in principle.
Fine, okay.
So at that point, you know, the opening it back up is kind of moot. We've already agreed, the board has already, if the commission has already agreed to the letter as conveyed in draft 4 with the edits discussed here in principle, that we would want that to go forward as a statement of the PAC. That was the vote. That was the vote. And so, you know, what you're
Sherry,
proposing is opening it back up.
Sherry, you've stated it perfectly. I see
Thank
three
you.
hands. I'd like to hear from Christina, Susan, and Christy and see if we can resolve this. Christina, go ahead. You have a suggestion?
Yes, the PAC has entrusted the author of the letter. The vote has been made, like Sherry has said. So we're going to move forward with that. But I think that maybe, and Susan can maybe confirm this, that if once the letter is now drafted again, would it be in violation if Vernon took a look at it just between him and the author, since he is the only one that is voted no? And if he found any edits that were substantial, then it would be necessary to bring it back to the group. But if not, then that's unnecessary and everyone's already agreed, except for my abstention and all that. But then that should be, I mean, that's just a suggestion. And then are we working under a timeline? What kind of timeline are we working under?
That's what I wanted to bring up. This would be most helpful if you can get it to the council before the Public Safety Committee work session on the bill. And the earliest that's going to happen is mid-September. So you have at least one meeting before that occurs. And we are still waiting for an Attorney General's opinion on this, whether or not state law preempts the bill in the first place, which I will forward to you as soon as we get it. We're expecting it. Well, they said mid-August, so I'm expecting it any day. But you absolutely have at least one more meeting to discuss this before, and stay timely as far as distributing it to the council.
That's very helpful. Thank you, Susan. Christy?
I was just gonna say, would another option, just like, if really all we need to do is to let people have a chance to look at it and process it, and there's not a ton more discussion, couldn't we just have like a 15-minute meeting if we have a quorum and vote on it?
Yes. The PAC was authorized to meet at the call of the chair in our legislation. And that's an option too.
I'm good with just moving on, period.
So the motion is carried. We will attempt to move forward with a draft. I think that the substantive part of this conversation has been extremely productive. I really admire the insights and the way in which you all have conducted this conversation this evening. And I would welcome a motion to adjourn.
So moved, Mr. Chair.
Is
I
there-
second it.
Please raise your hand if you vote aye. The motion carries. To meet again as called or at our next scheduled meeting. Thank you all very, very much. I thought this was a very productive meeting. And again, I really am proud to be working with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric.
Thank you.
Good night.